everyone and welcome to today's video. My name is Femke from Femke the Fiction on Instagram and Bookish Buddies over on Twitter. And today I am here with Desertathon recommendations. So this video is a little bit of 2-in-1. Esmay was actually going to upload another recommendations video, but her cat Nina is really sick right now, so she wasn't feeling up to filming another video. So that's why I have included a number of the recommendations that she was going to put on her second list. And they're on this list, so this is quite a long list. I won't be going into a lot of detail about all the books. I'm just going to tell you what I know and why they're on this list. A number of them I have read, a number of them I haven't, so some of these are obviously based on what I think is in the book and not necessarily what I know for sure is in the book. Regardless, not all of them are necessarily truly set in a desert, but all of them do have like a good sized chunk of the book set in a desert, even though that's not necessarily the general vibe, if that makes sense. But without further ado, let's get into the recommendations. So the first one is actually one that I don't think is necessarily very obvious, and that is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. See, this is one of my favorite books, and while this isn't really desert themed, it does have a really good chunk in the start of the book that is set in a desert. So that is why this book is on this list. This book follows Laszlo, who is a junior librarian, and he has been obsessed with the mythical city of Weep. As it turns out, Weep isn't really mythical, but it was just lost to history essentially, and when an opportunity presents itself, Laszlo goes along with a company of fantastic people in search of the city of Weep. Again, this is one of my favorite books ever. I really recommend that you read it, even if you don't want to read it for this readathon. I recommend that you read it regardless. But I'm just saying, you know, it has a pretty good sized chunk set in a desert on here, so you can if you want to. Then up next we have The Horse and His Boy. So this is actually the third installment in the Chronicles of Narnia. But from what I remember, this is actually like the most standalone of all the other books. You can definitely read this without having read the first two or the other 4. And this is, again, this is set in a desert. It's really thin, so if you want a thin book for Desertathon, this is something you could definitely read. And this is about 2 runaways. One of them is a horse and the other is a boy who make an unlikely journey together through the countryside. They soon find themselves in the middle of a battle, and you know, the outcome of that battle could decide the fate of Narnia itself. I really enjoyed this. Like I said, it's really thin. It's about, it's 230-ish pages. It's middle grade, so it's easy to read as well. But overall, this is one of my favorite books out of the entire Narnia Chronicles, so highly recommend that you read this. Then this is one that was originally going to be on Esmay's recommendations video, but since I own it, I decided to include it in mine instead, and that is Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri. So I believe this is set in like medieval India, but I don't know, in my mind, India is really desert-like, at least some parts of it. So I suppose it depends on, you know, when, where specifically this is set. But since it's called Empire of Sand, I figure there's a good chance that this is set in one of the desert parts. And this is about a girl who is caught between 2 cultures. And at one point she is caught doing some forbidden rites belonging to one of the cultures. And she is then presented to the king's feared mystics, who force her into an arranged marriage in order to get her to cooperate, essentially. I haven't read this book, I'm not sure if I said that already, but this is definitely one that I'm super keen to read. I hope to be able to get to this in this readathon. But if not, I mean, I've had it on my shelves for a pretty long time, but this is definitely one that I want to prioritize. Then The next book is one that was actually kind of on both of our lists, but we decided it would be on Esmay's list since I had other books. But I decided to put it on my list now, and that is The Killing Moon by N.K. Jemisin. So I really don't know a lot about this book. I know that it is set in a city-state of, I think this is pronounced like Gujare, which to me kind of sounds Arabic, which to me, in my mind, immediately means desert vibe. So this is honestly the biggest reason for me that this is on here. I've had the second book for a really long time, but not the first book. I actually only just got the first book, but I think Desertathon will be a perfect opportunity to read this book. Then the next one is arguably the book that I'm most hesitant about to put on this list. Because even though it's not really a desert vibe, it's like a wasteland. And in my opinion, a desert is also a wasteland, so that's kind of the same thing. But that is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. So I know this is a dystopia. This is about, you know, what happens when the planet dies, essentially. So I imagine everything dies, so it becomes like a wasteland. In essence, a desert. So there you go. That's why this is on this list. I've heard amazing things about this book, so I'm super keen to read this. So the next book is another one that I haven't read, but that is The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. I believe this is set in a North African inspired world. And to me, when I think of North Africa, my mind immediately goes to Egypt, Libya, Algeria, those kinds of countries, which consists of a lot of desert, a lot of sand. So that is the reason this is on here. Like I said, I haven't read this, so I'm not sure. I've heard some great things about this book. So yeah, regardless, I am excited for this. The next one is another one that I haven't read but have heard some great things about, and that is Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. Again, this is set in a North African inspired world. Yeah, even though it doesn't really explicitly say it, this book and this cover definitely gives me like desert vibes. So that is why it is on this list. Okay, so before I forget, I just want to get this one out of the way because it's not out yet, I believe, when I'm filming this. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's just about. But that book is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. So this is a Greek mythology retelling. I believe this is set in Crete, and I believe Crete is pretty deserty, sandy, rocky, kind of like that. Definitely think that belongs on this list as well. Like I said, I'm not sure if it's already out. If not, it should be out very soon, so hopefully many of us will be able to read this in May. All around excited for that book. I saw the cover a while ago and it was absolutely stunning. But yeah, like I said, I just remembered that because I don't have it in the stack. Obviously, I don't have it yet. That's where we are. Okay, so I'm not sure whether the next one should be on this list or not. This is not planned, this book. I wasn't going to put this on here, but I just remembered. But that is Days of Blood and Starlight by Laini Taylor, but also Dreams of Gods and Monsters by Laini Taylor. So these are the second and third installments in the Daughter of Smoke and Bone series. See, the first one is not set in a desert. The second one is, and the third one also kind of is. So that's why this is on this list. If you've read the first one and you want to read the second and or third one, you can definitely read that for this readathon and have it count for desert book. So another hint for you guys. Okay, back to the original planned list. The next book is A River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy. I really enjoyed this book. I was pleasantly surprised. It kind of reminded me of Daughter of Smoke and Bone in the sense that it has different races that are at war with each other, essentially. Not like literally, but it just, this book also has like chimera-like race, and Daughter of Smoke and Bone has that too. This was, I think, phenomenal. It has a really good world building. It has very interesting characters. I loved the romance. And the twists at the end were phenomenal. And I'm very, very excited for the next book. Then up next we have Blood and Sand by C.V. Wick. This is a gender-bent retelling of Spartacus, the legend of Spartacus, who led the slave uprising in the Roman civilization, Roman Empire. I believe it was officially like the 3rd century AD or something. Yeah, I really, really like this book. It's been out for a couple of years now. Unfortunately, this series will not be finished. The second book was cancelled. I don't know why, I just know that it was. It ends on a cliffhanger, but regardless, I thought this book was very interesting and very enjoyable. And I personally love that it was Roman Empire, but gender bent. Then we have The Tiger Queen by Annie Sullivan. I mean, if you read the synopsis, it starts with, in the desert kingdom of Agra, an ancient law forces 16-year-old Princess Kateri to fight in the arena to prove her right to rule. I mean, the synopsis spells it out for you guys. Desert vibe book, it's not very big. I started this book, but I wasn't in the right mood for it at that time, so I put it on my like to finish later stack. So this is definitely a good contender. Then the next book is one that isn't necessarily desert vibe book, at least not at first glance, but it has a good sized chunk set in a desert, and that is Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. So this book is not set in like a desert kingdom, but this is set in a world inspired by China. And China is a very big country which also has some deserts. So, you know, desert vibe doesn't necessarily have to be like Middle Eastern vibe. So that is why I put this on this list. I really, really liked this book. It was very twisty, very turny. I loved the romance personally. And yeah, I found this to be super refreshing, and this definitely made Elizabeth Lim into one of my favorite authors. The next book is another one that was inspired by a North African, is set in a North African inspired world, and it is another one that I haven't read yet, but that is A Song of Wraiths and Ruin by Roseanne A. Brown. So what I know of this is basically forbidden magic, enemies to lovers, matches like arena fights, matches, that kind of thing. It sounds phenomenal. I love the cover. This is a bit of a chunky boy, so just so you know, I mean, it doesn't really matter to me personally, but if you think it's too big, you might not want to pick this one up. But regardless, I've heard amazing things about this book, and I can't wait to dive in. Then the next one is another one that's not necessarily desert vibe in that sense, but that is Lifelike by J. Kristoff. So this book has a pretty good sized chunk set in a desert. It's not your typical old-fashioned desert, it's basically a desert of irradiated glass, but it's still a desert. I read this just a few months ago, and I really, really liked this book. It really surprised me. I mean, I expected to like it, but not as much as I did, if that makes sense. So this book follows Eve as she discovers a lifelike, which is basically a type of robot, android thing that's too much like humans and that started developing a will of their own. But she finds one in the scrapyard that she calls home, and basically chaos ensues, and we follow it through that. I found this book to be really surprising. What I didn't know is that this is basically like a twisty retelling of Anastasia Romanoff, the Romanov family, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, that really surprised me. I really liked this book. The twists at the end were phenomenal, and I can't wait to read the second one. The next book is Kingdom of Souls by Rena Barron. This is set in a North African inspired world, and it is set in the middle of a desert. I found the beginning of this book to be a little bit slow, but the ending of the book more than makes up for that. On the other hand, the slow start really allows for very good world building, and I was very, very intrigued by the end of this book. If you've already read this one, the second one, which is Reaper of Souls, I believe, it's just come out a couple weeks ago. So that is also an option. If you've already read this first installment, you can go read the second one. Then another one, which isn't immediately one that you'll probably think of, but that is Nevernight by J. Kristoff. So the first 100 pages or so, give or take, are set in a desert, and we also revisit that desert later on in the book. So definitely more than a quarter of the book is set in a desert, which to me makes it count as a desert vibe book. I personally really love this book. It follows Mia as she goes to assassin school, essentially. That's the really short version of it. So yeah, I really liked the characters in this book. I really like the magic system, what we know so far. I still haven't read the second or the third book. I've read like the first couple of pages of the second book, and I believe that's also set in the same desert. So I feel like that one could also be read for this prompt. Then we have 2 more books to go, both of which were on Esmay's list. And the first one is The Star-Touched Queen by Roshni Chokshi. I believe this world was inspired by Persia. It's kind of desert-like. I have read this book. I personally wasn't the biggest fan. But regardless, the second book, which is Crown of Wishes, has also long since been published. So I've heard the reviews for that one are quite a bit better than the first one. So again, if you've read the first one, Star-Touched Queen, you can also read the sequel, which is Crown of Wishes. And then the final book on this list is another one that was on Esmay's list. I haven't read it yet, but this is inspired by North Africa again, and that is The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. So I have to admit, I really don't know a lot about this book. I got this in the Illumicrate box of March. And what I do know is that this one has disability representation, but honestly that is the extent. But I do know this is North African inspired. Okay, so this was quite a long video. Like I said, not all of them are necessarily books you would immediately think that are desert vibes. Again, I haven't read all of them, so I could be wrong on some of these, but we'll see. I mean, it's fine. I mean, it's not like that's going to cost you any points or something. Yeah, so Esmay won't be uploading another recommendations video. That's why I included some of hers on my recommendations. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and hitting the subscribe button if you want to. If there are any books on this list that you want to read or that you definitely don't agree with or whatever, please leave a comment down below. I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!